All right. Well, like that said, anybody have some like very specific words that we're not allowed to say in your house? That's good. I think most houses do. I think most parents are like, okay, and you might not say them, but you're like, these are the words you cannot say. You're gonna hear me say it once, don't ever say it again. You might hear me say it more than once, don't ever say it. They're off limits, right? They're bad words, and or maybe that's not what you grew up with, but I think the vast majority of us had like some words that were definitely off limits that we couldn't say. Ours at my household, that was different. I grew up a little bit sheltered. Um, we couldn't say the bad words, but we also couldn't say words that sounded like the bad words, like these. I still feel guilty putting them on screen. Like, gosh, dang it! Like we can't. I would get in trouble for that. Those, those are bad words too, because they looked a little bit like. They sounded a little bit like the words that we really weren't supposed to say. These are guardrails. They're fence rules to keep you from the actual rules. They're just trying to keep you at a distance from them, so you wouldn't break the no cursing rule that your parents had, or my parents had as well. There's a rule like if you broke that, and if it wasn't just like the actual word, but if also you had an attitude, like you came across with a certain tone, also just as bad. And the consequence for that in my household was to get your mouth washed out with soap. And I don't know if you've experienced this. There's a lot of different strategies involved. I've heard of like the bar soap scrub in the teeth, like that's a strategy. I heard someone that actually like put liquid soap on a toothbrush and they made their kids brush their teeth that way. My mom was a little bit more straightforward. She just put liquid soap on her thumb and suds it up on my tongue. And then I couldn't swallow for like a full minute. And I did not like it. It was not much fun. So we also, I mean, we had to say something when we stubbed our toe, right? There's always like, you got to say something. So these are our words that we said. Goodness sakes, or crud. I don't know if anybody's familiar with crud. This was a multi-purpose word at my house. Somehow it also was my mom's homemade ranch dressing. We called it crud as well. I was like, I don't know why that makes sense. It's a made-up word that we're using just everywhere. Just like, yeah, just put crud on that. It's like, what? And then also, oh, crud. Okay, what are we talking about? That's what I grew up with, though. It's fine. I grew up and I'm mostly normal, so I mean, you can decide on your own. We also, my sister, I'll let you guess which one, the middle one. She decided that she wanted to outsmart my parents. So she told them that she liked the taste of soap. So she thought, like, if I convince them that I like it, then it takes away the punishment. And then what are they going to do? Vinegar. That's what they did. They decided, okay, well, we have another solution for that. So I think I drank vinegar one time, and that was enough for me. She drank a little bit more than I did, which I hear it's healthy. So my parents are just making her healthier, I guess. But we do this in life. We try to modify behavior. Ultimately, it's like, hey, if you experience a negative consequence for this certain behavior, as parents, we hope if you experience a negative enough, like a not fun enough consequence, that the child is not going to do the behavior. So we're just trying to adjust how they behave, especially in public. It's like at home, a little more grace. Out in public, like, oh, it's like, do not say that. Do not act that way. Don't give me that tone. Don't. We want to modify the behavior. And this is what we do, right? We want to avoid the negative behavior. And it's not that it ends when we're children. Like we grow up doing the same thing. We try to modify our behavior as a whole. Whether it's going on a date, you definitely 100%, you modify your behavior on that first date. You look nice, your shirts aren't wrinkly, you definitely took a shower beforehand, you brushed your teeth, you did everything possible to put your best foot forward. And you were so attentive to the conversation, eyes locked in, your ears were open like you weren't paying attention to anything else. You just fully focused on whoever was across the table from you. And now it's like, yeah, I get it. No, good idea. But we need to really do this thing. Like you have your own agenda. You're not really paying attention. Like you might take a shower every once in a while. Like it's whatever. It's just whatever. But we modify our behavior. Getting a job, modify your behavior. Whatever it is that we want to make a good first impression, you're modifying your behavior. And if you want to keep the job or you want to keep the relationship, you continue to at least at a bare minimum modify the behavior because you don't say the things that you sometimes want to say. Oh, yeah, you just did that or said that. Let me tell you what I think about that. That is a real quick way to get fired. And just FYI, this is just a public announcement. If you let all of this stuff out that's inside, if you decide to not modify any of the behavior in that moment, there's a very fine line between getting fired and charges pressed against you. Just a heads up. Just a heads up. We work so hard on modifying our behavior. And some of us recognize that it's only to a certain degree of success. Like only to a little bit do we actually get the change that we want to see, and it's usually only just for a brief moment. Because we wrestle, we struggle with things in life. We struggle with our humanity, with our sinfulness. We say that in church. We don't say that outside of church. Outside of church, we just say it's mistakes. I make some mistakes a lot. Inside here, we just tell you what those mistakes are. The sin. It's like you're just hurting yourself and hurting other people. We all know this intrinsically, that modifying your behavior is just not enough. Like it doesn't actually work. It's not a foolproof plan. It doesn't actually work all the time. There's something more in there that we're wrestling with. There's something more at play, which is exactly why we're going through this series, Living with Yourself. We're discussing 3 habits to safeguard your soul. These are habits that keep you, the you want to be, rather than turning you into a you your current you would despise. It's a lot of you in that conversation there, which is why it's important. And you're like, wait, I want to talk about God. We'll get there. Don't worry. But we also have to deal with us. We have to deal with us. Because if we want to move forward in the direction we want to move forward in, if we don't want to wake up one day and not despise ourselves, if like we want to become the person we want to become, then we have to deal with us. And this is true when we look at other people, it's easy to judge them. It's easy to think, what are they thinking? Even this last week, there's another bit of news that came out that I saw, and is someone that I had a great amount of respect for in the church world. And again, there's another scandal that took place. It's like, oh no. And it's awful. It's horrible. And we say things like this as soon as we hear about it. How could they live with themselves? How could they live with? I couldn't live with myself. If that was me, I could never. I could never. And just like we talked about last week, you absolutely could. You could. If left adrift, if you just decide, I'm good, my conscience is strong enough, my integrity is so intact, my morals are so in place, I would never let that happen. And even the most integrous person in the room, this still can happen. It's still a possibility. The reason why this could absolutely happen to everybody, the reason why you think, no, it would never happen to me, is the exact reason why. Because you don't think it can happen to you. If you don't think it's possible, then you don't prepare for it. It's kind of, we talked about this last week. If you don't think bears are possible when camping, you don't prepare for them, but the reality is bears are very possible when you go camping. That's where they live, just FYI. That's where they live out in the wild. We live in houses. When we go out of our houses out to the wild, we're on their turf, so they can show up. We can't treat it like it's an impossibility, because if you do, you'll be ill prepared for the moment that may happen. And same is true about you. Same is true about your potential for future moral failures. If you think it can't happen to you, it puts you squarely at risk and at danger, because you will not prepare enough. You will not do enough. Which is why this series is so critical. It's so important for the health of our families, for the health of us. The health of your soul determines your capacity for duplicity. Duplicity is being multiple versions of yourself in different environments, different places. So you have like your work self, your family self, your church self, your friend self, your basketball team self, like whatever it might be. You have a different person and a different version of you that shows up to each of those spots. And some of those selves wouldn't even recognize each other. They're so different. You talk differently. You have different jokes. You do things differently in those different environments. And the health of your soul determines whether you're able to be that duplicitous in your life or not. A healthy soul has no room for duplicity. It actually starts to close the gap that's created. It draws you back in to become who you actually are, rather than hypocrisy, rather than the compartmentalizing, all the justification, the normalizing, all the posturing that you do. When you have a healthy soul, it moves you back towards the center. And last week we talked about the first habit to safeguard your soul. Surrender your will. Surrender your will. That you have to realize at a certain point, if I only trust me, I fail. We've all seen this. We've all experienced to a certain degree. Everybody knows this. We're not perfect. We fail. We make mistakes. We need to trust somebody that is perfect. Somebody that cares about us more than we actually care about us. That loves us even better than we love us. I talked about a daily prayer that just if you would regularly just say a version of this prayer that God, today I give you my hands, my feet, my mind, my mouth, my heart, all that I am, my hopes and my dreams, I place back in your hands. I submit to you so that you can do with me whatever you want. Let me just do your will today. Your will be done. This is some version of this. Your will be done through me today. If you get to that spot, this habit, this idea of surrender allows you to be protected, to be safeguarded from becoming a you that you don't want to become. And your spouse doesn't want you to become. And your children don't want you to become. Your family, your friends don't want you to become. We talk about following Jesus a lot. Following is absolutely surrendering. Because you can't follow very well if you're still deciding which direction you're going. Like if you want to follow someone, that means you're deciding whatever turn they're making, I'm going to turn with them. I'm going to let them drive. I'm going to let them make that choice and that decision. When we talk about following Jesus with our lives, it's the same thing. I'm going to let him drive the car. Maybe not physically, like Jesus take the wheel. But in our life, that's what we're doing. I'm going to decide that I'm going to allow God to lead me through some difficult moments, tense moments. Today, we're looking at a specific moment, and it's almost comical to me from a certain angle, but it's beautiful also. Because we're talking about this specific moment with Jesus and his disciples and the Pharisees and the priority that they look at. Like the levels of priority certain actions and behaviors have. And today, we're going to understand the premise of this second habit that we're going to look at. So this moment, let me kind of paint the picture of what's going on. This moment, Jesus has disciples. He's got the Pharisees that are following him around too, trying to catch him and trying to get him in trouble. And sure enough, they decide that they found something wrong again, like something that he's got to deal with. And they come to him and they're like, hey, Jesus, your disciples are making mistakes. They're messing up. They're not following and they're not obeying the traditions of the elders, is what they say. Now it's different than just the written Torah, the written law. This is what's known as the oral Torah. So this is the Torah is like the law of Moses, like the Old Testament, like the law that you're supposed to follow if you're going to be a good Jewish boy or girl. Now, there's other laws that were kind of added to safeguard. They're added to protect their fence laws in essence, in order to keep you, to make sure that you don't break the actual law. It's like we're going to keep you in the straight and narrow so you don't go way off track here. So there's written laws that you really don't want to break, but then there's the oral Torah that's going to protect you from breaking the written laws. And these oral traditions, the traditions of the elders, these are passed down from generation to generation. They're taught, each generation has taught them over and over again, and there's more that's added to them, more and more that's added to them. Like the written law would forbid you from doing any business on the Sabbath. Like you can't do any business on the Sabbath. It's supposed to be a day off. You're not supposed to be doing any work that day. So obviously you can't do your business that day. So the oral Torah, the oral tradition, they would tell you not only can you not do your business, but you can't even exchange money. You can't handle money that day. Like that, because it leads to business. Because if you have money out, if you're exchanging money, then that's leading to doing business. So just don't even make it possible. If there's no money available to exchange, then you're not going to be doing business. Now, this specific complaint that the Pharisees brought to Jesus on this moment wasn't about money. It was actually about hand washing. Yes, how to wash your hands properly. I taught swimming lessons once, and they had a nurse come in and tell everybody how to wash their hands and which song to sing while you're washing your hands. Make sure you wash your hands long enough. Now, we think that's silly. The oral Torah went even way further into the exact process, what it looked like, how you're supposed to do this. Now, the written law that they're trying to protect was that you wouldn't eat anything that was unclean. Like you weren't supposed to consume anything that was unclean. And so the idea that if your hands were unclean and then you ate, you'd actually be consuming something that was unclean. So the hand washing process was very important to make sure that nothing was unclean on your hands and therefore nothing was unclean going into your mouth. Accidental oral consumption. The heart of the rule, the law in and of itself, was to honor God, right? Not to offend him, to make sure that we were doing what you're supposed to do. But the oral part of the tradition part of it kind of got in the way. It actually got almost promoted over the top of the written law. Like there's so much attention focused on the hand washing process. And if you talk to Jesus at that point, he probably would have told you, he's like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of the secondary laws because they get bent out of shape. They get put in a different priority position than they actually should be. It heaps guilt rather than the intent of the law itself. Like it puts you at odds with God where you feel like you're far from God rather than doing something good and proactive. So this is the exact moment we step into. Matthew chapter 15, verse 10. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen and understand, which if you're a teacher, I wish it was that easy. Just be like, okay, I'm going to say something and you're going to understand it. If only it worked that way. If you're a student, you also wish it worked that way. You're like, just say it once and I'll get it. That'd be awesome. Parents, does not work that way. We know that. Okay, next verse. He says, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them. That's a big statement. What you eat is not what defiles you, is what Jesus said. Now, in light of the law, in light of what was taught, in light of what the teachers of the law were saying, this was a big statement for any rabbi to make, let alone one that claimed to be the Son of God. Like this is a massive, massive statement. It's a big deal. It doesn't sound like a big deal for us, but it's a big deal in this moment. He continues on. He says, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them. People are like, huh? And then Jesus' mic drops, and he kind of walks off the stage. He's like, all right, hope you got it, because that was good. Everybody else is like, huh? That's not what, I don't understand, Jesus. And actually, the disciples kind of follow him. They're kind of like have this private conversation a little bit later with him, like, what exactly were you saying? They're a little bit confused. They're like in the dark still. Jesus, can you go over that again? What were you actually trying to say? And Jesus gives him kind of a wink, kind of elbows him a little bit, jokes with him a little bit. He says, are you still so dull? Jesus asked that. I love this. In fact, this is so accurate. It's not only recorded, this moment's not only recorded in just one of the Gospels, it's also recorded from a different disciple that wrote this down in the Gospel of Mark. Are you so dull? I mean, pretty accurate. Both of them said that happened. I'm guessing that's exactly what Jesus said. Are you so dull? He asks, don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? Interesting. For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. That flew in the face of everything that was taught from the other rabbis. Like, this was a big, tense moment. People would have fought. People would have thrown punches, thrown rocks. They would have gotten angry, spit, done the whole deal. Like, they'd be spitting angry is where that comes from, in my mind at least. Now, I know that we often talk about the road to a man's heart is through his stomach, but this is not really what Jesus is talking about. The disciples would be sitting there, they'd hear that, they'd be like, okay, Jesus, I know we might be a little dull sometimes in your words, but we understand the human body. We understand, like, with some regularity, like what happens every day when you eat every day. Like, we get it. What's the point? He goes on, he says, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. And the disciples are like, yeah, it's kind of gross, Jesus. Like, you don't need to hit that point hard. Like, we get it. We've been to the bathroom after Peter. Defiled. We get it. I guess gross. Sorry. A little bathroom humor on a Sunday, whatever. We get it, though. But that's not what Jesus is getting at. He says, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. That's where evil thoughts come, out of your heart. And all the moms in the room are like, not my son. He doesn't have evil thoughts. Everybody else's son, yes. Let me burst the bubble. Even your son. Everybody. Evil thoughts come from the heart. Every harmful action starts first and foremost with a thought. Case in point. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. Folly here is like bad judgment. Every one of those, you don't just like do without a thought. There's a pre-thought before the action. There's a thought ahead of time. None of these behaviors also, if you look at them, none of these behaviors are directed at God. Which you would think, like, wait, we're going to talk about God, so this vertical relationship, and Jesus is like, no, the evil that comes out of you is directed at each other. It's describing a broken relationship. This is how you break relationships. This is how you ruin and destroy relationships. The disciples are like, let's get back to what puts us at odds with God, though. Because this is a little bit too uncomfortable. And Jesus would say, I am talking exactly about what puts you at odds with God. Because what you do to mistreat other people, what you do to harm other people, absolutely puts you at odds with God. I mean, we say this pretty regularly. If somebody did something or said something to hurt or harm or mistreat your child, would you be okay with that person anymore? I wouldn't. Cross them right off the list. You going to do that? You going to say that to my son? We don't have to be friends any longer. Guess we're done here. That's the same attitude, the same mindset that God is saying. God, our Heavenly Father, is like, don't mistreat my children. It puts you at odds with me. This is a massive shift from what is typically taught in this context at this time. It describes the kingdom that Jesus came to introduce and to establish on this world. Continues on. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. I mean, this point is actually like it's coming from inside the house. Like, this is, if you're into like horror movies. I'm not really, but I know that's a joke. It's the idea of like, it's already inside. It's not coming from outside. It's already inside. It's in there. Now, anybody see a reference that Jesus is making about washing their hands? No. No. Because the idea that Jesus is trying to make is pay attention to what's within. Pay attention to what's going on inside of you. What's going on inside of your heart? What's going on inside of here? You've got to pay attention. That's where the stuff bubbles up from. When you say something that you never have said before, when you cut somebody down a way that you've never thought before, that's not an accident. That started inside of you. It's been something that's grown in you. It's something that's adjusted, that's been hiding in the dark, that finally comes to light and bubbles out. We're looking at outside things to blame our sinful nature. It's like, well, it's their fault. It's because of this circumstance. It's because of this thing that I got wrapped up into it. And maybe there's an influence there, but ultimately, you're not responsible for what goes on out here. You're responsible for what's going on in here. That's how you safeguard yourself, is what's going on in here. Our behavior will eventually be found out. It will be. It'll be reflected in your hearts. So what's going on in your heart eventually comes out in your behavior. And those moments where you're like, I kind of blew it this week. I kind of hurt that relationship. Man, I don't know what was going on with me at work. You have those moments, you're like, where is this coming from? I can tell you. Something's going on in here and you haven't paid attention to it. So let's look at the list again. Immorality, adultery, theft, deceit, envy, greed, slander, bad judgment. When you look at this list, do you know someone that's lost their family, the relationship they had, their marriage? Do you know someone that's lost their career because of one of these things? And when you heard what happened, you were shocked. You're like, oh, no, not them. They were so nice. I actually liked them. And then you transition to, how could they do it? How could they live with themselves? To be honest, it's not that hard. You just let yourself drift in the current of life, and you'll get there. You'll get to the duplicity level where you can justify, you can normalize different behaviors and ideas and thoughts. You don't correct it, you just allow it to sit there, and it will lead you somewhere. These people have, and we do this often, we manage the gap rather than doing something about it. We compartmentalize rather than draw it back together. Eventually, it will split you apart. And to be honest, it might be you. You might be wrestling with this right now. There might be a circumstance that you're going through, and you're like, man, this is too on the head. I knew going to church today was a bad idea. Because now I'm sweating. Good thing the lights are low because my face is red. And I don't know how to escape this moment. I get it. Because when you're wrestling with, when you're going down that road, when you're feeling yourself being torn apart, sometimes you show up in a spot and you don't know how to rectify, you don't know how to face it, because when you're looking at it on a screen and you're like, that's the word, that's the thing I've been dealing with. All of a sudden it identifies the thing that's been kept a secret, the thing that's been in the gray. We haven't defined it yet. So today, as we get into it, here's the habit. Habits to safeguard your soul. Monitor your heart. You have to pay attention to what is going on inside of you. Pay attention to it. The rest of the morning, we're going to look at 4 specific things, 4 specific areas that kind of connect the majority of these. To monitor your heart. Guilt, anger, greed, and jealousy. And if left unattended, there's potential here to rot your soul. There's potential here to defile your soul and who you are and who you become. To become a person that if you met them today, you would despise that person. We all have that potential. if left unattended. You would hurt yourself, you'd hurt those around you that you care about. So, as we get into it, the first one, guilt here. Guilt has a driver. When you've done something to offend someone, to hurt someone, and you recognize it, the only thought that you have whenever you see them is, I owe you. I owe you. And you're constantly in this tension of at a loss. You're constantly trying to earn back, trying to give back, trying to do something about what you took from somebody else. And when you place yourself in that situation over and over, when all you think is, I owe you, I owe you, I owe you, it doesn't actually allow you to grow. This idea of I owe you, this guilt, if not dealt with, will absolutely rot your soul. The idea that I have a secret, the idea that I have to do something to come back to square one in the relationship, to earn back the trust, to do whatever it takes. So how do we move forward from here? How do we move forward from this point? How do we change direction? Confess. I know it's like, obviously, not rocket science here. But you have to own it. You have to define what you did. You have to talk to the person that you hurt. And it might be messy. It might make it, 10 times worse than it was a week ago. Because they don't know the full story. It's going to blow up in their face. But the way forward is through confession. This absolutely goes back to sensitize your soul once again. So instead of being numb about it and just feeling awful about yourself all the time, you're going through behaviors, and when you confess it, you realize, oh, that's the thing. I got to stay back. That's my border. That's my boundary. That's my guardrail that I put in place here. And you can't go back in the relationship to where you were, as much as we wish we could. Once we damage the relationship, you can't go back to what it was. You can only move forward to work at healing the relationship. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't heal all the way. A lot of us are carrying around scars because of broken and harmful situations and relationships. But that's actually the way forward. Rather than an open wound, a scar that's left. And you need to hear this. It's going to come to light one way or another. The secret thing that you've been keeping a secret, it's going to come to light. Either you confess it or someone's going to detect it. That's how this works. You can't keep secrets in the dark forever. Eventually you will be found out. Eventually it will come out. And when it does, it has the potential to ruin and destroy everything. So don't sit by. Don't sit idle. Be proactive. Do something about it. Start with confession and move forward. Now the next one here is anger. Anger screams, you owe me. Usually these two are kind of connected, just opposite sides, right? That's all that you just see red all the time. Someone has taken something from you. And maybe it's your own self-confidence. Maybe it's your own self-worth. That they've stolen your identity. They've stolen how you see yourself. They've stolen your marriage. They've stolen your relationship. They've undermined your future. They've disrupted your career. Sometimes more than disruption. Sometimes it's a complete dissolving of what was in front of us, what was available to us before is now completely gone. Now the problem, you can't, just like I said before, you can't get back what was taken from you and have it just go back to normal. It's not like someone just took something from you and you're like, oh, there's the book I've been looking, just put it back in the spot, now everything's wonderful and fine all over again. That's not how relationships work. That's not how our hearts work. And if you're dealing with anger about something or someone, let me tell you, it is rotting your soul. It's rotting you from the inside out. Now, I'm going to say the solution, and you already know it. You're like, don't say it, Andrew. I'm going to say it. You have to forgive somebody. You have to step forward and say, I know you hurt me, and you know that you hurt me, but I'm going to forgive you. And it's not because you deserve my forgiveness. It's not because you've earned it. It's not because I've held this against you long enough and you finally earned back all the mistakes that you've made. Because I choose to forgive you. And if you're a Jesus follower, here's the way forward. You choose to forgive someone because you've been forgiven for everything you've ever done without being able to earn it, without being able to deserve it. That Jesus died for your sins. And because of that, we can live this out in our life, in our relationships, as painful as it might be. It is incredibly easy to say. It is so difficult to actually do. And people, you and me, if we sat down, we had coffee, you explained to me why you're so angry, I might be tempted to be like, yeah, just ignore it. Like, you don't actually have to forgive him. Like, you just keep on doing what you're doing. Like, you'll figure it out. Because it's so painful, I get it. Like, that humanness in this is like, that would be hard. I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Jesus won't do that to you, though. Jesus won't. He won't say, no, you don't need to forgive him. Every single time, Jesus would tell you, you have to forgive them. Why? Because he loves you more than I love you. Because he says, this will rot your soul if you don't deal with it. And I care about you too much to let you rot your own soul. Get rid of it. Cancel the debt by forgiving them. Even and especially if they don't deserve it. That's the way forward. That is the way out. Moving on to greed. Greed's a hard one to see in the mirror. But greed says, I owe me. I owe me. You become the provider for yourself, for everything, if you're dealing with greed. You're like, no, I deserved it. I earned it. I worked for it. It's my name on the check, so it's mine. And you don't recognize where it came from. You're like, no, I do. At the hours I put in, I got a check in return. And then I bought my stuff with it. And that's how this works. I'm surprised you didn't know that. Here's the actual part that you're missing. You were given something before you got the paycheck. You were given an opportunity that you might not have earned or deserved. You had a relationship cross paths with you that you had nothing to do with. It just happened. You're like, oh, it just happened. And God's like, actually, I went like this. Bing. Put you together. You work with a certain level of work ethic. And you're like, yeah, I worked really hard. Yes, and also God gave you the potential to do that. You're like, well, I'm really smart. Yes, born with it, in fact, because God placed that in you from birth. Congratulations, you're utilizing the potential that he gave you. You should be, but you should also recognize where it came from. We tend to think that what comes across in my hands is for me. That's what greed says. If it's in my hands, it's for me. Well, actually, the reality, the truth is, the insight is here, that if it comes across my hands, it's God entrusting this to me to put it where it belongs, to put it where it needs to go. So we're just a filter. It's like, yeah, I'll take that and put that over here. Yep, this needs to go over there. Yep, this needs to go back here. Like we're looking for opportunities to love other people the best we can with what we have in our hands. This is a hard one. Because the way forward from greed is to give. It's generosity. It's generosity. And it doesn't feel good, especially if you're not in the habit of it. You might be like, oh, yeah, I do that every once in a while. But generosity is an intentional, on a regularity. Like you give, generosity isn't when you remember something and you just give and it doesn't make a difference. You're like, yeah, I found the change on the floorboard and I gave it to the guy. Look how great I am. That's not generous. That's just cleaning your truck out. That's all that is. You're like, yeah, it was in my ashtray. There's $5 in there. Great. You forgot there's $5 in there. It didn't matter to you. You want to be generous? You choose to give until it stings, till it hurts, till you can feel it, till you have to give something up for it. That's what generosity looks like. It feels, I'll be honest, the first time you decide to do this, it feels like ripping a Band-Aid off. You're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. But you get into the habit of generosity. You get into the habit, this is a pattern of life, and all of a sudden the greed dial turns way down. Because when you're choosing generosity, you're deciding that your stuff no longer has control over you. Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Greed? I'm just going to give this away. See how you like that? That's what generosity does. It puts it back in control. It puts you trusting God again rather than you trusting you. And I promise you this, there's going to be a day, if all that you trust is yourself in this life, there's going to be a day where you are up against it and you have nowhere to turn and nowhere to go because you're out of your depth. There's something happening that you can't affect. Doesn't matter how much you've saved up, how much you've earned up, how big a truck you drive now. There's going to be a situation that you can't control. And if all you trust is yourself, you're in a dark and deep hole in that moment. But if you've learned to trust God with everything, including your stuff, you will find that there's peace where peace doesn't belong. And it's an amazing, incredible moment where you realize how trustworthy God actually is. Okay, last one is jealousy. Jealousy is ugly. Let's just say that. Jealousy is ugly because it celebrates the failures of other people. You smirk when you hear bad news about other people. You read the headline and you're like, oh no. Like there's a thing inside of you that's like, I knew I was better than them. And you celebrate their failures. You feign shock with a smile on your face. You go back inside, you're like, whoo, win for me. I outlasted. I win. I was better. That's gross. That's disgusting. That's ugly behavior. Jealousy forces you to compete with others all the time. And sometimes they know who you are. A lot of the time, they don't even know you exist, and you're competing with them. They're affecting your life to a great degree. They don't even know you. You don't even know them, really. This is a big deal, and it can rot your soul from the inside out. So, jealousy says, God owes me ultimately. That's what jealousy is. It's what fuels this bacterial infection. Is that, you know what, God? You should have made me a little bit prettier. Because that's something that people are born with. You know what, God? You should have made me a little bit richer, a better opportunity, a little bit taller. You should have made me and given me a better family to be born into. Or a better location to be born into. A better something, better opportunities. And you actually, in your jealousy, you're blaming God. The way forward, we have to admit this. And it's not fun. It's not easy. But there is an antidote for this bacterial infection. It's to celebrate. Not the failures of other people. It's to celebrate. First celebrate what God has given you. That you recognize. Because when you're jealous, often, you don't even look at what God's given you. You just look at what God's given other people. If you take inventory, like, I actually have quite a bit. I've actually been blessed in this life. That God has done things for me. And that's worth celebrating. And then once you get that piece in place, celebrate other people and what they get, what's been given to them. Celebrate them personally and publicly. And it's hard. I get it. This is not a, wow, God's so generous with her. Like, Of course she's getting the promotion. Of course she got the, wow, she's totally deserved that. Or even, or wow, look at how generous God is with her because she definitely didn't deserve that. Right? That's not it. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a bless her heart situation. You know that? Like, oh, she's so good. Look at how nice God is to her, bless her heart. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually celebrating. Incredible that God would do that for her. Incredible that she had that opportunity. That is so great that that happened for her. I mean, I wish it would have happened for me, to be honest with you, but I love the fact that she gets to experience that or he gets to experience that they get to do that. That's awesome. To be able to celebrate publicly is a big deal, personally. So we got to bring all of these, our guilt, our anger, our greed, our jealousy. We got to bring these out from the dark into the light. When we do this, it diminishes their power and control over you. When you define what you're wrestling with, it's easier for you to actually get some footing, to get your feet underneath you. And we start to remove these gross growths out of our heart. We tell them, you're not the boss of me. Now, I have a question for you, and this is one that I actually heard from Andy Stanley that he used to use for his kids, and I've started to use it with Luke also. But I think this is a great question for all of us. When you find a spot where you can actually quiet down and do some introspection, some evaluation, ask yourself this question. Is everything okay in your heart? Is everything okay in your heart? Are you angry at some people? Do you need to apologize to someone? Are you jealous of something? Are you celebrating somebody else's failures? Have you recognized some of that? Are you just angry, upset all the time, and you don't know where that margin relationally has gone? Is there something going on in your heart? If you want to close the gap in that duplicity aspect of our life, we have to get this right. We have to. You can't get this right without monitoring our heart. You can't move it back into that. You can't move the two pieces back together again without monitoring, without evaluating what's going on in here. You have to. And if you're a parent in the room, we have to champion this for our kids. Because your kids, if they learn this habit, this behavior of monitoring what's going on in here and figuring out how to deal with it, how to handle hard moments in life, you're actually preparing them, because we know this, that the healthier you are on the inside, it makes you stronger and more resilient from what happens down the road later in life. And they might be faced with something, and your ability to train them how to monitor what's going on in their heart is actually going to safeguard them down the road. And it's going to make them better adults, better individuals. It's going to make them better parents. It's going to make them be better spouses. What you do today matters. What you do matters absolutely. So monitor your heart, surrender your will, come back next week and learn what habit number 3 is. I've got some discussion questions for you. Oops. Which of these 4 are you most prone to live with rather than eliminate? Guilt, anger, greed, or jealousy? And why? Which one of those is rotting you from the inside out? Which of these 4 are the most difficult for you to do? Confess, forgive, give, or celebrate? Why? And lastly, what do you know you need to do but haven't done yet? What can you do today? Because when we meet on Sunday mornings and we have these conversations and we talk, and it's one thing to hear the information and sit in rows, try to understand the concepts and hear the truth, but it's an entire other thing to be able to implement this and apply this in your life. And that is where true life happens. That's where true life change happens. That's where course correction happens. That's where the gold in life is, when we're able to actually apply these truths. So please continue the conversation. Keep dealing with what's going on here. Check in. Check in what's going on in your heart. Monitor your heart. Let me pray. We're going to close up for this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for everything that you've done for us, that you've given us so much, and you continue to to open doors, and you continue to protect us and close doors as well. But God, I pray that we would learn that you are trustworthy. That as much as some of these things that have crept their way into our heart, as much as these things seem to be overwhelming, and as much as they seem to be so scary and terrifying, if we actually address them, if we actually do something about it, if we actually open that door, open that gate, we don't know what's going to come out. God, I pray that you would give us specifically this morning the insight of exactly what we need to do to address that pain, to address that insecurity, to address whatever we need to address. And I pray that you would give us the courage and the boldness as well to do something about it. That we would confess what needs to be confessed. That we would walk this out. That we would forgive those that we need to forgive. God, that we would choose generosity. That we would not be driven by our things and what we collect and gain in this world, but we would choose rather to define ourselves by what we give away. And God, I pray that we would not get wrapped up in the jealousy battle, but we would learn and have the courage and boldness to celebrate other people. Because that's what frees us from jealousy. And that's what moves us towards you and towards your heart for them. So God, I thank you for all of these things that you do for us. I thank you for the ability that we have to choose. I thank you that you first loved us. In your name I pray. Amen. Thanks for being here with us. We'll see you next week for the conclusion of Living with Yourself.